This morning we're going to study Jesus is the reason. Now somebody might think, well, Jesus is the reason for the season. Let me understand this, or let's understand this. Jesus is the reason, period. We would see that Jesus is the reason to live. In Philippians 1:21, Paul said, "For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain." It wasn't a matter of a certain portion or time of the year. It was every day, every moment. Jesus is the reason. He even said, "I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me." That Christ lives in me is not something that's tied to a day, a week, a month, but it's an everyday thing of the year. In Colossians 3, verse 3, Paul wrote, "When Christ, who is your life, so is Christ your life." And we would see Jesus is the reason for the daily cross bearing. In Luke 9:23, Jesus said, "If anyone should come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me." No, it's not a certain time of the year, not a certain day of the year, but it's daily cross bearing. And so as we consider this new year ahead of us, well, in January, we oftentimes think in terms of New Year's resolutions. And so what will be yours? Will it be that you want to eat more healthy, lose weight, save money, or pay off some debts? Maybe it's just to stick to the resolutions you make is your New Year's resolution. But I would hope that it would be that New Year's resolutions could also be of a spiritual nature. Not just the matter of eating healthy, losing weight, saving more money. No, a spiritual nature. In 1 Timothy 4, verse 8, Paul said, "For bodily exercise profits a little, but godliness is profitable for all things." So many New Year's resolutions have to do with eat right, exercise, lose some weight. Okay, that can help, but godliness is most important. And so I would hope it would be that you might have some spiritual New Year's resolutions, maybe Bible reading goals. By the way, in the back there are some Bible reading guides. In fact, more than one that you could use for the coming year. And I'd encourage you to take one and try to stick to it. But have some Bible reading goals. As well, have you considered having some prayer goals? Setting a certain time of the day, maybe a certain amount of time that you would spend in prayer. But I hope you take it even to another level of not just your personal spiritual life, but how you might influence others in their personal spiritual life. Have evangelism goals. You know, it may be as simple as every week I want to invite somebody to come and worship with me. And it may be a different person, or maybe it's the same person more than once. But every week I invite somebody to come and worship with me. As simple as that sounds, as easy as that can be, most of the time it's not done. But I would hope that we would have some evangelistic goals. Maybe it'd be more intense. Can we study the Bible together? But have some New Year's resolutions on a personal level, spiritual basis. You get to February, and you know, if you think about, well, what goes on in February? Probably might think of, well, Valentine's Day, February the 14th. And so you're thinking of the subject of love. But let's be reminded of what Jesus said about love. When Jesus was asked, "Teacher, what is the great commandment in the law?" He said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your soul and with all of your mind. And this is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. And so here, as you think about the month of February, that month of love, and remember, Christ is the reason. Remember what Jesus said about love. Love for God and love for your brothers. And you get to March, what do you think of? Well, maybe you don't think of, but I kind of do, because I had two children. There was a couple of years Beth played softball, and for quite a number of years, Brooks played that Little League baseball. Well, March is kind of the practice month, but that's when you really get geared up with Little League baseball. And I want to tell you, it can kind of take over in a sense. Oh, by the way, there's Brooks. I can show that he's not here today. He's out of town. But I want to tell you, he had two good years, really good years. 10-year-old and 12-year-old, he pitched those years. And in fact, I kind of made a chart and still have it of his pitching. And he had about nearly 100 strikeouts in that season. And I'll tell you, it was fun to watch. And if you've had children that age and been in it, you realize it can almost just take over. And I'd suggest to you that while Little League baseball is fun, and I'd say this too, it's good for these boys and girls as it's physical exercise for the children. And it's a very good opportunity to teach what being on a team means. But I'd say this, there is a more important responsibility for parents. Yeah, more important than baseball. And it's to bring them up, your children up, in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. And I think we should be cautioned when you get caught up in it. Don't forsake the most important, the Lord and the teaching of the Lord. In fact, I think you might put it this way. Keep a perspective. It's fun. It gets to be really important to that child. It can be important to the parents. But keep perspective. In 2 Corinthians 4:18, he speaks of the things that are seen or transient or temporary. But the things that are unseen are eternal. I need to keep remembering this is temporary, it's transient, and I need to place the importance on the eternal. Jesus is the reason. And as we get to April, what do you think about? Well, April 15th, that due date for the tax returns. And I'd encourage you, do it by then. Don't pay the penalty. Get it off your mind. Get it finished. April 15th. And this is kind of a reminder not only of taxes, but the law of the land. And so it is that when we find Jesus was asked a question about the taxes, clear enough, we're to pay our taxes. He said, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. So yes, pay your taxes. And more than that, obey the law. We find in Romans 13, there in verse 1, be subject to the governing authorities. Looking down in verse 5, therefore one must be in subjection. And so in both of these instances, we could sum it up by saying, we are to obey the law. And as you get down to verse 6, for because of this, you also pay taxes. Jesus is the reason. Yes, Jesus is the reason. We cooperate with our government and are subject to them. So we pay our taxes and so we keep the law. Jesus is the reason as well as we move to the idea of May. And think in terms of May, that's graduation. I know we may have to wait to the very end of May. And in some occasions, some may even go into the 1st of June. But it's an incredible time for somebody that's graduating for high school or graduating for college. Now, I know somebody might say, wait, I had a December graduation. That happens. But we think in terms typically of a May graduation. And with that, it's kind of like what's next. In fact, for the previous 2 to 3 years, probably people are thinking, well, what's next? What do I do? And then sometimes getting a little nervous. I don't know what to do. I don't know what I want to do. I don't know where I want to go. And yet that date of graduation is looming. It's getting closer. What's next? It kind of eats up the mind, eats up the heart. And so there's lots of decisions to be made. Decisions about life, what I will do, the kind of things I will do, what decisions will be made. I would hope that in May, with graduation from high school and graduation from college, that we think more so in terms of not just my plans and me, but God's plans with what I do. How does it affect more than just me? How does it affect family, others? How would it affect my service to God? How would it affect my worship to God, my prayer to God, my commitment to God? You know, you get over to James 4, beginning of verse 13. James wrote these words, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow, we'll go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit." Now, verse 13 is all about the plans you make. He's not condemning making plans. In fact, we must make plans. But he's putting a perspective on it. He says in verse 14, "Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. For what is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes." In other words, life is brief. So no matter the plans, it's temporary, transient. Verse 15, "Instead you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that." In other words, God's to be included in those plans. So getting to the month of May, a month of decisions, a month of plans, keep God in those decisions and keep God in those plans. You figure out what you're going to do, but it's with God. It's not without God. Then we come to June. And June is the wedding month. Now I realize that many in here weren't married in June. For Tish and I, it was May the 9th. That was, frankly, the first occasion we really could get married as far as what was going on in our lives. But 15% of weddings are in June. That is the wedding month. And so, with getting married, had one preacher say, "Yeah, she came up to me and she says, 'You would not believe who God has brought into my life and is gonna be my husband.'" And he says, "Are you sure that God brought him into your life?" She says, "Yes, I'm sure." He says, "I want you to tell me that in 15 years. You know, I would hope with regards to marriage, once again, we let Christ be the reason. And we have in our mind, will she help me get to heaven? You know, this picture is not so much of a happy couple. And if two people can't get along while they're dating and engaged, it's doubtful that they're getting along so well when they're married. Will he or she help me get to heaven? I would hope it would be that the he or the she would be a part of your daily Bible reading and prayer, that he or she would be a part of your worship, that he or she would be a part of your dedication to the Lord and to the church, and that he or she would be a part of your service to God and the church. It gets to be June. We still need to have Jesus as the reason. Will he or she get me to heaven? And so we get to July, thick of the summer, thick of the summertime. And so somebody says, vacation. And some of you have been to Disney World, a big vacation. Or some of you have even taken a cruise, big vacation. Well, you know, not all vacations are big. There was a time that basically our vacations were just to go see family. I grew up, vacations were to go to Mississippi and see family. But that was still a vacation. After about 5-6 years of not doing so much but going to family as we had sick parents, and time was then spent in Missouri. This year we said we wanted to go on a bigger vacation, and I got to looking, and I said, hey, Tish, you know, these points from this card can get us to Los Angeles, and then these points takes $400 more. That can get us to Hawaii. Honey, we're going to Hawaii. We can get there for $400. There's a picture to prove it. We were there. And that's my favorite picture. Got to surf and see the splattering of the water. And we went to Manoa Falls while we were there, and I forgot where that is. But you know, we make these plans for vacation, and that's okay to have a vacation, whether it's a big one or whether it's just a little one. But I have to say this. Can I take this vacation to God's glory? In other words, do I keep God in that vacation? Whatever I do, eat or drink, whatever you do all to the glory of God. You know, I'd say, first of all, I go out of town, regardless of the reason, but especially if it's vacation, do I find a place to worship? And if I'm thinking that, what if I go to this place and there is no place to worship? Do I make arrangements for my wife and I then, or my family and I, to be worshiping together? We actually have some, I call them portable Lord's Supper. You know, the kind that comes in a little plastic thing, and the bread tastes kind of like plastic. You know what I'm talking about? They'll use these at last leaders, usually polishing the pulpit, and so really big churches may use them. We've got some back there that sometimes people say, I need 2 or 3 of them. You may have to watch the date on them, but things out of date aren't usually too bad. But if I can't find a place, and I anticipate I will not be able to find a place, still, we would worship. Can I maintain my Christian convictions on the vacation? You know, I've heard sometimes people say, and you've heard the statement, what happens in Vegas, what? Stays in Vegas. You know what? That really stinks. Because it's almost like saying, we can go here and misbehave. I think that's almost the implication of it. And then we get back and nobody knows about it. No matter where I go, I need to be sure to maintain my Christian convictions on that vacation. We get to August, back to school. Wasn't always that way. When I was a kiddo, first day of school was almost invariably the day after Labor Day. In Ukraine, I think it's interesting, they have the Day of Knowledge. It's September the 1st, and it seems like no matter what day September the 1st is, even if it's Saturday or Sunday, the kids go to school that day for the first time. Little boys, they'll wear their suits, girls that wear their fanciest dresses, and they'll take flowers to the teachers. And as, you know, their towns are kind of more cramped than ours, and people are walking to school, pretty much everybody. Saw these little boys and little girls dressed up so, carrying these flowers. Neat to see. But back to school. You know, I'd hope that as we would go back to school, that we'd be kind of thinking, I should do my best. Do you like school? Some people have the privilege of saying, yes. Some people, no, I can't stand it. Still, do your best. We find Solomon said, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. And I suggest this as well. Respect those in authority. Respect your teachers. And I can promise you this. You respect your teacher and you do your best, you're going to do okay. Seriously, you will do fine. August, back to school. Jesus is the reason. In September, oh boy, that's the first full month of college football. And who is your team? Well, I grew up in Tuscaloosa. And maybe you grew up a little closer to the plains. And so you've got a favorite team. And there's the few and the rare that would be in Alabama whose favorite team, who knows, it may be the LSU Tigers or the Florida Gators or the Tennessee Volunteers. Or maybe it's some far-off place. But you know, football kind of takes over in the South in September. Well, I think there's some things to be learned. One, it's recreation, not religion. Got that? It's recreation, not religion. The second thing I suggest, practice the golden rule. What do you mean by that? You know, if you don't understand, I don't know if I could tell you in the next 30 seconds. Somebody says, well, they're practicing the golden rules, not practiced on the gridiron. By the fans, it can be. Be gracious. Be kind. Your team wins? Great. You don't have to make the other person feel miserable. It's recreation, not religion. Practice the golden rule, as Jesus said in Matthew 7:12. Then we get to October. Remember, Jesus is the reason. In October, well, sometimes the weather cools off. Not always, but sometimes it does, and you begin to look in your winter wardrobe. So think in terms of wearing warmer clothes. But yes, weather and comfort does affect how we dress. If it were 32 degrees outside right now, some of you ladies would be having some big coats rather than dress the way you are. Yesterday I got out and worked in the yard, and it felt like summertime. When I went out in the morning, I had a long sleeve shirt on, and after about an hour or two, I was really wishing that I'd had a short sleeve t-shirt on. Yes, the weather affects kind of how we dress. What about in the hot, sizzling weather? Does it affect how you dress? Let me suggest this. Always maintain modesty. Always. If it's July and the heat bearing down in the hottest day of the year, or if it's in December, January, or February and we're experiencing one of the coldest days of the year, we should always maintain modesty, dressing in respectable apparel with modesty. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 9. And then we come to November. Remember, Jesus is the reason. And we think, what about November? Well, that's that month that has Thanksgiving in it. And I'm so glad we live in a country that has a Thanksgiving Day as a national holiday. And November just kind of reminds us to be thankful. As Paul said in 1 Thessalonians 5:18, give thanks in all circumstances. And in Philippians chapter 4, verse 6, he said, do not be anxious about anything, but everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Let your requests be made known to God. And so, yes, Jesus is the reason. And so we are thankful. Whew, I'm glad we don't have traffic quite like that in Montgomery generally. But around this time of the year, it gets heavier, and the stores get more crowded, and people get crazy. December, as we move towards Christmas. And I just call this the December stress. The traffic, the crowds. I say general stress of the holidays. People try to do so much more, fit in so many more things, do for others. And all of this ultimately is good. But it as well can be stressful as we try to fit into almost 1 month, 2 months worth of activities. So how do we deal with stress? Find in Matthew 6, Jesus said, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious. Okay, technically we might say anxiety is a little different than stress. Actually, anxiety is how many people would deal with the stress on a personal level. He said, do not be anxious about your life. And he says, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Now realize this, he says, don't be anxious, don't stress. And then he says, eating and drinking. It's like, I don't even want you to worry if you're going to have anything to eat tomorrow. And I certainly don't want you to worry about if you get up in the morning, if you're going to have anything in your closet to wear. Think about it now, our stresses and our worries, they're not so nearly as basic as what you're going to eat, what you're going to wear. And I guess kind of one conclusion is, if I'm not to worry about if I'm going to be hungry tomorrow, I sure ought not stress out over several lanes of traffic or having to wait an extra 5 to 8 minutes to get down this road. Or whether or not I'm going to make it to all the activities over the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Or if I can buy the exact gift for this special person in my life that they would enjoy and like. If I'm not to worry about food and drink, surely I'm not to worry about those things. And you get later on, beginning of verse 31 in Matthew 6, he said, "Therefore do not be anxious, saying, what we shall eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the Gentiles seek after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them all." And then verse 33 is that conclusion. "But seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." You might just say, yes, Jesus is the reason. No matter the day, no matter the week, no matter the month, each kind of carries its own, but for them all, Jesus is the reason. As we conclude, let me ask, has Jesus been the reason for you and your life? If you're not a Christian, no matter how good and moral you live, if you're not yet a Christian, if you've not yet obeyed the Lord in faith, turning from your sins to confess that faith, to be buried with baptism, have to say, no, Jesus is not yet the reason for you, or you would have obeyed Him. But is Jesus the reason for you? Not just today, December the 25th. What about any day in January, any day in February, any day the remainder of the year? Have you been living like Jesus is the reason for you? If we could assist you in your obedience this morning, if there's a need for prayer, we ask that you come as we stand.